Communism is yet again rearing its head, even right here in the United States, and this is looking to become a new battleground in our own backyard. President Trump even said this during his Independence Day speech marking the 250th anniversary of the United States.
A generation after we fought and won the Cold War against the menace of communism, there is now a resurgence of the communist menace in our land. Communism is a mortal threat to American liberty. It is the greatest threat to our country. So on the eve of this 250th anniversary of American heritage, we resolve and swear for all to hear that the citizens of the United States of America will vanquish communism quickly. America will never be a communist country.
And it seems this warning ties into something even bigger that could be happening behind the scenes. And to understand this, well, we need to look back at history. There's an ominous speech from April 1961 that has become kind of a testament to time. In it, the late President John F. Kennedy warns a culture of secrecy, a hidden monolithic conspiracy, and subversive forces operating within the United States are plotting its downfall. And this was something he was looking to change. But JFK was assassinated less than 2 years later in November of 1963. That speech is often painted as being tied to his death, but in its full context, he was actually warning against the threats of communist subversion, and he brought up a discussion on how the United States should face that threat. And now that speech from JFK, it's making a comeback in the public sphere. President Donald Trump recently reposted it, and how it goes is this. It starts with a direct warning against communist subversion and its wars by other means, and then it goes even deeper.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
Now, after that, JFK goes on to call this a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. And he adds, this communist system conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Pretty serious stuff, right? And now President Trump is warning we're facing that same threat again. He posted that video alongside an ominous statement of his own. He wrote this on Truth Social, quote, "The communists are finally making their move. I've been waiting and preparing for this for a long time." He says it's easy to be a communist. All you have to do is say, "I'll give you everything." But that means you're taking it away from others that have earned it. And he says over thousands of years, that ideology has not worked once. He says the game is on. Enjoy watching. So what exactly is Trump talking about? Well, look, a lot has actually been happening in the country that can give us some hints. And much of this does have a lot to do with the same threats JFK warned about more than 60 years ago. First off, we should look at the full context of JFK's speech. This was a direct address to journalists and the people running America's news agencies. The speech was titled "The President and the Press." It was given to the American Newspaper Publishers Association, and basically he laid out the challenges the government was facing at the time with the Cold War, as it related to being transparent and open with the press. He noted the communists were running a type of shadow war, and that, well, a degree of secrecy was also needed on our end when facing that. Now, what was also happening at the time? JFK's speech, that was April 27, 1961. That was a little over a week after the disaster of the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was April 17 to 19. That was when Cuban exiles backed by the CIA were sent to try and overthrow Cuban communist dictator Fidel Castro. and the whole thing was a disaster. The Cuban exiles did not get the support they were promised. They fought till they ran out of ammo. Then they were captured, imprisoned by Castro. And an important run-up to that, news outlets in the United States, they played a large role in helping botch that operation. What happened? Well, journalists caught wind of it. There were leaks to the media, and those leaks played a hand in the disaster for the operation. And a big part of JFK's speech was to urge the press, well, look, have more restraint on leaking information that could damage America's national security, especially when it came to military action. And that intent was also a big part of why he invoked the issue of secrecy, something he said he didn't like either, but he argued was necessary in the face of the nature of the threat we were facing, threats we still face today, in fact. Subversive movements overthrowing democratic processes, guerrilla fighters running wars from the shadows, intimidation tactics meant to scare people into submission, and look, a vast hidden war being fought by the communists through unconventional means, a combination, again, as he put it, of military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. And what's really interesting is that most of what JFK was talking about is in fact still going on right now as we speak. National security leaks to the press threatening military operations. Look, in context, this got so bad recently, the Pentagon had to limit the access of journalists in June of this year. Radical agitators like Antifa using violence to intimidate people into silence, a problem that has seen several Antifa factions get prosecuted as terrorists. Guerrilla fighters and shadow wars, from the state-backed terrorists to the foreign-funded radical protesters right here on America's streets. And of course, well, the new Cold War against foreign communist states that combine military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations, only now, rather than being run through the Soviet Union, a lot of that is run by its replacement, the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go a bit deeper into this. When JFK was president, the Cold War, that was front and center. And part of that included the communist push for a global revolution, genocides, mass human rights abuses, Soviet and Maoist-trained guerrilla fighters destabilizing entire countries, overthrowing governments, and then replacing them with communist dictators. Think North Korea, Cambodia, Vietnam, various parts of Africa, and a very long list of others. Terrorists like Yasser Arafat in Gaza, trained by both Soviets and the CCP, whose forces were hijacking airplanes, killing civilians. Communist-trained narco-terrorists like Shining Path in Latin America, mixing the drug trade with politically motivated violence. And even right here in the United States, well, there were threats at home. The Red Scare narrative in sympathetic media, anti-American protests on American campuses, violent organizations like the Weather Underground carrying out terrorist attacks against our own government. But even that was just part of the broader picture. Beneath all of this was an even deeper threat. Ideological subversion, movements to destabilize our country, to weaken us from within, to target the pillars of our society, decay them, and bring the whole thing crushing down. And that started with a war on the minds of Americans. Soviet defector and former propagandist Yuri Bezmenov explained how this worked in a now famous interview from 1984. Watch this.
What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Well, it seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. With foreign wars, for example, we have the CCP now deemed the enabling force behind the scenes. Like NATO in the EU, they've determined the war between Russia and Ukraine is only able to continue because of the CCP's backing of Russia. The direct assessment from NATO actually says this, quote, "The People's Republic of China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war through its so-called no-limits partnership and its large-scale support for Russia's defense industrial base including the transfer of dual-use materials such as weapons components, equipment, and raw materials that serve as inputs for Russia's defense sector. And it's the same thing with Iran. The CCP has been supporting the regime with everything from missile defense systems to satellite intelligence to economic support and political backing. In Latin America, same thing. After U.S. forces captured former Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, what was telling? The country's leaders were given an ultimatum if they want their oil back. They had to push out influences of Russia, Iran, and China. But the wars don't just end with surface conventional wars. They actually include a slew of other tactics and also a large number of other battlefields: economic, diplomatic, scientific, political, and actually a whole lot of others. Now look, we no longer call this the Cold War. Instead, well, we have a long list of new names for this type of warfare. There's short of war tactics, gray zone warfare, fifth generation warfare, and of course China's unrestricted warfare. And even right here on American streets, we have similar operations being run to destabilize the nation, with financial and political ties going back to the Communist Party in China. In fact, the Department of Justice just launched a grand jury investigation into Shanghai-based billionaire Neville Roy Singh and how money is flowing from China to fund the mass protests on America's streets. In other cases, well, secret Chinese police stations are getting busted for operating on American soil. In one case, after the leader of one of these secret police stations is found guilty, U.S. Attorney Joseph Nisela Jr. told the press, quote, "A police station operating in New York City at the direction of the Chinese government has been exposed, its sinister purpose disrupted, and its founder held accountable for blatantly disregarding the law and our country's sovereignty." It doesn't end there. The CCP has efforts for transnational repression, programs to export human rights abuses even beyond its own borders, and these are also now being uncovered and exposed. In fact, the Congressional Executive Commission on China recently wrote that the regime's, quote, transnational repression and malign influence operations pose significant threats to human rights and sovereignty, intimidating and censoring legal residents on U.S. soil and others around the world. And we're also now seeing the same with CCP spies, even within our government. In one of the latest cases, the now former mayor of Arcadia, California, a naturalized U.S. citizen who immigrated from China, pleaded guilty to being a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. And she's actually just one on a long list of other CCP spies now getting busted right here in the United States and around the world. And it's the same in the criminal underworld as well. It's actually now coming to the surface. The CCP is involved in propping up America's fentanyl epidemic. In fact, it's the main source of fentanyl, in addition to many other drug synthetics and precursors, killing Americans and propping up crime on our streets. And even more than that, money laundering for the drug cartels is going through China's underground banking system. And all of this ties back to Trump's new and ominous statement: the resurgence of the communist threat, the war that he says he's been getting ready to fight. As he puts it, he's been preparing for this for a long time. The game is on, as he says, and now it seems all that's left to do for us is to enjoy watching. But what do you think? Do you think the threats America's now facing really amount to a type of new Cold War? Are the communists really making their final move, as Trump says? And does this really amount to the type of subversive threat that JFK warned about? If so, well, is enough being done to stop it? Let me know your thoughts in the chat, and until next time, this is The Josh Phillips Show.